Great prices and service. Turn to Bill Page Toyota. Visit BillPageToyota.com.
Good morning, America. Breaking overnight. Fire in Trump Tower. Flames roaring from a 50th floor apartment. The man inside killed. Nearly 200 firefighters called in to battle those flames. Some hurt. Why were there no sprinklers on that floor? And this morning, the investigation into how it all started.
Pruitt. President Trump standing by his cabinet member under fire, tweeting support for the EPA chief as a new report details the millions spent on his 20-member full-time security detail.
Crash investigation, a junior hockey team's highway tragedy. At least 15 people killed when a bus collides with a tractor trailer. Injured players drawing strength from one another.
Philadelphia Flyers are devastated to learn of the tragedy involving members of the Humboldt Broncos junior ice hockey team.
The tributes overnight from the NHL.
And highway landslide. Look at this. Debris from a crumbling road crashing into an apartment complex.
It all come tumbling down like Humpty Dumpty.
People evacuated just in time. Was weather a factor in all of this?
Live from ABC News in New York, this is Good Morning America.
Yes, this is live television.
Ron is
Good
heckling
Sunday
Paula
morning.
right in the moment before she goes on television.
See, I do. I'm trying to be a good sport about it.
You are. You're always
Love
a
you,
good
Ronnie.
sport.
All right. We're going to get to those stunning visuals, you guys, that we just showed out of Pennsylvania. Also coming up on the show this morning, the dreadful spring weather. Wind chills in the 20s in a huge portion of the country, and more snow is on the way in certain spots.
It's unacceptable. Look at this picture.
This is so
Kentucky. This is from yesterday. It says April 7th. Seriously? Worth noting, Kentucky happens to be Sam Champion's home state. We're not going to unfairly malign him for the weather.
It's not like we made it snow on Kentucky on purpose.
If you would do it to your home state, Sam, you know, if you would do it to them, who would you spare anybody? By the way, Sam does say that there is some good news in the weather department coming up.
Briefly, for like 4 days.
It'll be warm by June, he said.
Exactly. Much more from Sam coming up, but we do want to start with the breaking news overnight. A fatal 4-alarm fire at Trump Tower here in New York City.
You can see the flames coming out of the 50th floor. President Trump was not there at the time, but he has been tweeting about the incident, calling the tower, quote, well built.
Fire officials say that the structure, it held up well, but they do point out that the building does not have sprinklers on those residential floors because sprinklers were not legally required back when the tower was built.
Also this morning, we're learning much more about the man who did die in that fire, and ABC's Zachary Quiche is covering it all from right outside Trump Tower. Zachary, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. That's right. Still an active scene here on 5th Avenue, but last night, my producer and I literally had to run to get here. Police had the whole perimeter locked down. First responders and firefighters were on the ground and in that tower, and there were crowds of people everywhere. President Trump's home address engulfed in a massive fire. Look at those orange flames. Windows smashed, black smoke just rolling out. This is 50 stories up in one of the most well-known addresses in New York City, Trump Tower.
Michael Cohen, who's Trump's lawyer, texted me and said, "Are you in the building?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You better get out ASAP." According to the FDNY, the call came in for a fire at 5:30 Saturday night. There were no official evacuations, but one man didn't make it out.
The apartment was virtually entirely on fire. They pushed in heroically. They were knocking down the fire. They found one occupant of the apartment on the 50th floor.
67-year-old Todd Brasner was killed in the blaze, and 6 firefighters were injured. These photos, taken by a worker in a building next door, show what folks were up against. The yellow jackets are firefighters. The fire chief said the fire did not reach the president's residence, but did not rule out smoke damage. The building has been under 24-hour protection, and a nearby street has been completely shut down since he was elected. The president and his family were not home. In a tweet, the president saying, "Fire at Trump Tower is out, very confined, well-built building. Firemen and women did a great job. Thank you." The building's upper floors did not have sprinklers. They were not required when the high-rise was constructed.
The upper floors, which are residence floors, are not sprinklered, but the building sure stood up quite well.
Dan and Paula, the building structure trapped the heat and smoke, according to fire officials. The cause is still unknown.
Zachary, thank you. And there's another breaking story we want to talk about this morning. It involves dramatic and disturbing images coming out of Syria. The government there accused of launching another poison gas attack on civilians.
Last time this happened, President Trump ordered airstrikes in retaliation. So we want to bring in ABC's Stephanie Ramos. Stephanie, good morning. And any response from the administration?
Paula, good morning. Nothing yet from the White House, but here's what we know. More than 40 people, including children, may be dead and many more wounded in a possible chemical attack in the city of Douma, which is near Syria's capital. The AP reports Syrian opposition activists and rescuers say the poison gas attack happened late Saturday when toxic gas inside barrels were dropped by helicopters over the city. Opposition-linked first responders say entire families were found suffocated in their homes and shelters. The pictures are difficult to look at, but first responders say the victims showed signs of gas poisoning.
Oh, these visuals are so disturbing to see these children suffering once again. How is the U.S. responding, Stephanie?
Well, the State Department did release a statement overnight saying the United States continues to use all efforts available to hold those who use chemical weapons in Syria and otherwise accountable. State Department officials also called out Russia for its support of the Syrian regime, saying it ultimately bears responsibility for what happened. Now, the Syrian government denies these allegations and continues to say they don't have any chemical weapons. Now, this comes a year and a day after President Trump ordered dozens of strikes on a Syrian regime airbase for its use of sarin gas that killed approximately 100 Syrians. Paula, Dan.
Horrifying situation there in Syria. Stephanie, thank you. And President Trump is now weighing in on a domestic controversy, taking to Twitter, reiterating his support for his embattled EPA chief.
Scott Pruitt is his name, and he's facing a series of ethical questions over his security and travel expenses to his housing situation. The president issuing a rather panoramic defense on Twitter, and ABC's Tara Palmieri is at the White House with more. Tara, good morning.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. President Trump gave a full-throated endorsement of Scott Pruitt last night, tweeting that he's doing a great job. This as Congress comes back to session this week, and they don't all agree. He also touched on another touchy topic for the Republican Party, taking on a trade war with China. This morning, President Trump pushing hard for his campaign promises and standing by yet another cabinet member under fire. The president, out for dinner in Washington Saturday night, showed his continued support for embattled EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Tweeting, while security spending was somewhat more than his predecessor, Scott Pruitt has received death threats because of his bold actions at EPA. This coming hours after new documents show that the first quarter cost for Pruitt's 20-member full-time security detail, triple the size of previous EPA administrators, was on pace to cost taxpayers close to $3 million.
Scott has done a fantastic job. I think he's a fantastic person.
The president, meanwhile, not losing sight of the border wall he promised. These are the first of 4,000 National Guard troops he authorized to protect the Mexican border.
We're going to be guarding our border with the military.
Trump responding to an uptick in illegal border crossings in March.
Siéntate. Sit down. Sit down.
We don't know if they're murderers, if they're killers, if they're MS-13.
While also weighing in on trade. Despite the quakes in the stock market this week, the president is not softening his tone on China. After announcing $50 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods, that Beijing quickly matched with $50 billion in tariffs on U.S. goods, the president embracing what appears to be the first steps in a trade war. Tweeting, the United States hasn't had a trade surplus with China in 40 years. They must end unfair trade, take down barriers, and charge only reciprocal tariffs. And there's always some drama in the West Wing about how to tackle all of these issues. A White House official told me yesterday that last month, General Kelly offered to resign only if that was the president's wish, and it's not the first time that he's done that. They also disagree on how to deal with Scott Pruitt. Now, President Trump thinks that Scott Pruitt should stay, and Kelly thinks that he should leave. Dan, Paula?
All right, Tara, thank you. And for more on all of this, we want to bring in ABC's Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz, who's in Washington. She's going to be hosting This Week a little bit later this morning. Martha, good morning to you. So Tara just mentioned the possible trade war between the U.S. and China. You spent a considerable amount of time in Iowa this past week with farmers who really could be caught in the middle and affected. What are you hearing?
Well, good morning, Paul and Dan. Indeed, I was out there in Iowa and in Nebraska and talking to farmers and others who could be impacted by this. And they are worried. They are frankly worried. This would come right out of their pockets, right out of their bank account. And when you're a farmer, you can't suddenly change what you're growing. There's soybean farmers who I talked to, and they said, you know, planting has already begun. You decide something like this, years before what kind of crops you're going to have. So they are watching this very, very carefully, but certainly a lot of worry.
Yeah, this is a situation that carries real political risk for the president. But I want to get back, though, to the situation in Syria. These allegations now of another chemical weapons attack on civilians by the government of Bashar al-Assad. Do you think the president is going to feel compelled to act yet again here?
You know, I think one of the things we have to remember, and both of you remember this from last year, is that the president was very affected by images, by those images of the children suffering in those chemical attacks. They're very similar to these images we're seeing now. So I would not be at all surprised if we see another missile strike on Syria. But of course, you heard the president this week saying he wants to get out of Syria soon and leave it to someone else. But that, of course, is the fight against ISIS, which he thinks is over. And he has had a very, very strong response to these chemical weapons attacks in the past, and they are trying to confirm that right now.
Yet another big decision facing the president this morning. Martha, thank you. And I want to remind everybody, Martha has a big show this morning. She's going to be joined by President Trump's Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor, Tom Bossert.
Yeah, once again, thanks to Martha. Plus, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is going to weigh in on the threat of a trade war with China and the president's decision to station National Guard troops along the Mexican border. That's coming up on This Week right here on ABC. Look forward to those conversations that she's going to be having. And a nation is in mourning right now. Condolences are pouring in from around the globe after a deadly crash involving a popular youth hockey team in Canada.
Yeah, this is a horrifying story. 15 people, many of them teenagers, killed when a tractor trailer collided with their bus. And Ron has been following the story. Ron, good morning.
Yeah, truly horrifying. This happened at a rural crossroad in a remote part of Saskatchewan. That truck slamming into the bus carrying 29 people, including the entire Junior Hockey League Humboldt Broncos team, who were on their way to a playoff game. The aftermath is just horrific. This morning, a nation grieving the loss of 15 people, many of them teenagers, after this devastating crash.
We will never forget April 6th, 2018.
It happened Friday evening. A bus carrying the Canadian Junior Hockey League's Humboldt Broncos and the tractor trailer colliding.
The hockey community has strong roots in our province, and the sudden loss of so many lives will be felt not only in Saskatchewan, but across this country.
On impact, the bus ripped apart, the wreckage strewn onto the rural highway.
And we will never forget the members of our Broncos family who were taken from us.
14 on the bus injured. This heartbreaking photo showing 3 of the players holding hands in the hospital. Among the dead, Broncos head coach Darcy Hogan.
Those were his boys. I know he would have, and he did, laid down his life for any of them.
The players, who ranged in age from the teens to 20, were on their way to a semifinals match. Overnight, the National Hockey League paying tribute to the victims, the Chicago Blackhawks and the Winnipeg Jets, both wearing jerseys with the word Broncos on the back. Just some of the many pro teams standing together at this terrible time.
The Philadelphia Flyers are devastated to learn of the tragedy involving members of the Humboldt Broncos junior ice hockey team.
Canadian police say it's too soon to say who was responsible for that accident. The town of Humboldt, where the hockey team was from, was just a few thousand residents. So you can imagine almost everybody in that town would have known somebody on that team. Tonight they'll be holding a vigil for the victims. Terrible story.
Just awful. And the community owned that team. That team meant everything to them. Thank you. We do want to move on now to the retrial of Bill Cosby on sexual assault charges set to begin tomorrow.
But a potential issue with a juror could cause a delay here. Cosby's attorneys want this juror booted. ABC's Ariel Reshef is here with the story. Ariel, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. Jury selection wrapped up this week. Bill Cosby now one step closer to learning his fate, but his retrial already rife with controversy over jurors.
Bill Cosby flashing that familiar smile and waving to fans as he entered a Norristown, Pennsylvania courthouse Friday. Drama in the courtroom days before opening arguments in his retrial, set to begin Monday. Cosby's defense team urging the judge to oust one of the male jurors. This after another prospective juror, a woman, approached the defense, claiming in an affidavit that during jury selection the man said, "I just think he's guilty, so we can all be done and get out of here." But a possible inconsistency inconsistency, the woman describing him as in his mid-20s. Reports say that 11th juror in question appears to be middle-aged. It comes after Cosby's lawyers accused the prosecution of discrimination for removing a black woman from consideration for the main jury of 12. The judge ultimately upholding her dismissal. The volley over jurors could delay the start of the highly publicized retrial, round 2 for the 80-year-old comedian, the first major celebrity on trial in the Me Too era.
I think it's going to be challenging for jurors to put aside what they've heard about the Me Too movement, what they've heard about the Time's Up movement, and all of the pre-trial publicity that Bill Cosby has gotten.
The former TV dad now facing 3 felonies stemming from allegations he drugged and sexually assaulted a former Temple University women's basketball administrator in 2004. Cosby has denied the charges, saying the sex was consensual. In June of last year, a triumphant Cosby raising his fist after his first trial ended with the jury deadlocked. The judge declaring a mistrial.
Although we're disappointed that the jury was not able to come to a unanimous verdict in this case, we appreciate the extraordinary sacrifices that the jurors made.
One of the biggest concerns in this case, aside from the media frenzy, is the balance of race and gender on this jury. 10 of the 12 jurors are white, 7 are men, 5 are women. Cosby's retrial expected, guys, to take at least a month.
Yeah, the prosecution's concerned about those numbers and how it all shakes out.
Exactly. A lot of people concerned about it.
Yeah, thank you, Ariel. It's time to check the weather on this April 8th, as we continue with our cruel spring, and Sam's got the latest. Hey, Sam.
Good morning, everyone, and good Sunday morning to you. And we do have some milder air to talk about, but let's talk about the cold air first. We can prove that this April is colder in a lot of places than last April. Just look at Lake Superior, already carrying more ice than they did last year. But for a lot of people, this is the coldest April they'll remember. Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities, starting with the coldest April on record. And you can see these wind chills down to 46 degrees in New Orleans on Sunday morning. Monday morning, Nashville at 37, Washington, D.C. at about 30 degrees. New York, you're at 25 degrees to start the morning with that wind chill. So with solidly cold air in place for a couple of days, every little system that moves will kick a little dusting of snow. And as much as 5 inches of snow in some cases like southern Minnesota into some parts of Iowa here, but most people will just get a little dusting. In Chicagoland, when it gets to you, it's probably a mix there. Here's the best news on the board. And the best news, by the end of the week, we start to see this warm up in the west, move all the way into the middle of the country and even into the northeast. And we'll talk about those numbers. That's the weather around the nation. Here's what you can expect this morning.
Definitely needing the winter jacket this morning. Temperatures in the 20s to 30s. Definitely a wintertime feel. As we go through the afternoon, our daytime high looks to hit about 50 degrees, but with the breeze, our feels like temperatures going to stay in the 40s pretty much all day long. We'll see added sunshine today. Our next big change up going to arrive for the middle half of the week, and I think it's one you'll like. We are expecting to see temperatures in the 70s Thursday into Friday, and that warm up looks to stick with us for the first half of the weekend.
You will spread the weather love when you get to 80 degrees in Washington, D.C. the end of this week, and maybe 70 toward New York.
There's a caveat to all of this, though, isn't there?
Possibly
just
doesn't
don't
last
respond.
All I know is
winter's coming.
now on that weather map, I'm not looking at the weather numbers. I'm just looking at, okay, where do I want to go to actually be warm?
We're in the warm spots.
Yeah. What's my next vacation?
Ron, let's check in with you again and see what's going on.
Hi again, Paula, and Dan, Adrian.
Good morning.
And Sam, good morning. We're going to begin in Germany, where investigators there say they have no leads as to a motive for the man who drove a van into a crowd of people in the city of Munster. This happened on Saturday, killing 2 and wounding, injuring 20 other people. The 48-year-old driver then fatally shot himself inside of his vehicle. The 2 victims, both German, were a woman and a man. Here in the U.S., 2 soldiers died when their Apache helicopter crashed in an Army training area of Fort Campbell, Kentucky on Friday. The incident bringing the total number of military deaths in aviation accidents this week to 7. An Air Force Thunderbirds pilot died Wednesday when his F-16 crashed in Nevada, and 4 crew members perished when their Marine helicopter went down on a routine training mission in California. That was earlier this week. A body has been recovered near the site where a family of 8 drove off a cliff in Northern California. Investigators say they believe the parents, Sarah and Jennifer Hart, intentionally crashed their vehicle with themselves and their 6 children inside. The body that was found appears to be one of 2 girls who are still missing. And taking place this weekend, more than 100 town halls across 34 states, with students, parents, and lawmakers discussing gun control.
What we need is that empathy to be
translated into policy so that we can make sure that we can keep people safe in school, in movie theaters.